15 minutes after.
Do you need that tilted? Do you need me to move?
You're fine.
Oh, okay.
This one, you know, there's moving parts here. So.
Or I could move.
From years ago, was your one was
Very personal.
yes, it's rough.
You can throw stuff. You can throw stuff.
Welcome everybody to our collectors talk. I want to thank anybody that is joining us online, hand camera. If you are joining us online, that is all thanks to our NEH RAMP grant and our digital media producer, Madison Pate. For those of you who are here in person, I'm so glad you were able to make it out. I won't spend too much time taking you away from the main event, which is Stephen Benson and his talk about our downstairs gallery exhibition, Gathering Light, One Collector's Journey. We are going to start in here with some images projected on the screen that we felt like were going to be a little difficult to all gather around in person, but then we'll take a short intermission and transition over and walk the actual gallery as well. I do want to make some announcements about some upcoming events, of which we have several. We're really kind of cramming in some programming last minute in this month. We have later tonight, we have an opening reception over at the ACA, the the Atlantic Center for the Arts over in New Smyrna. We do an exhibit over in their space once a year, and our fantastic Christina Katsolis over there behind the camera has curated an exhibition titled Revisions of Andrew Soviani's work. It is gorgeous. So if you have time, opening reception is from 5 to 7. If not, if you want to make it by sometime in December and see it, it's a beautiful place and a beautiful exhibition. On December 6th, I am going to be teaching a zine workshop from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. If you are enjoying our Days of Punk exhibition upstairs, this is going to be all about making counterculture zines. We also, if you are enjoying Days of Punk upstairs, and you'd like to come back to the museum during our opening hours between 11 and 5 on December 9th, we would love to get a testimonial from you. That exhibit is going to be traveling, and the artist Michael Greco would love to get some people's thoughts on the exhibition before we deinstall it after December 17th. Also, if there are any veterans in the audience and you are interested in partaking in our Art in Action series, our next one is December 10th. Christina is going to be doing some hemograms, and there's limited space. So if you see Christina over there, as I already pointed out, if you're interested, please go talk to her. She will let you know and get signed up with her. If you are online, you can email Christina at christina.katsolis, that's Katsolis, at daytonastate.edu if you would like to join. And then on December 13th, from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., we are going to do a virtual program with Michael Greco for the Days of Punk exhibition. So please check out our website for more information on that. And then coming up, we're going to have some new exhibitions. January 10th, Stranger Fruit by John Henry will be opening. And then January 26th, Threshold, a self-portraiture exhibit will be opening. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Stephen Benson. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me here. I had to switch all of the microphones because the jacket is a little warm. But one thing that I'd like to start with is to thank the museum director, Whitney Broadway, Christina Katsolis, did some magical things and how she figured out how to prepare them for exhibition. A lot of the things that are in the exhibition were never intended to actually be publicly exhibited. So to find ways to do that was very tricky. Maddie Pate, thank you she's up in front here, taking care of all the tech things. Laura Haynes has been very helpful, and Scott Reed, who put this together so we're able to have this conversation. One of the things about this whole idea of gathering light, that title just came to me because there is, for me anyway, a little bit of a spiritual quality to having original photography, which I love, on the wall, and that I could live with. So that's where this gathering light comes into play. So it's not just collecting photographs, that in a way it's more than that. The other thing that I want to make sure to mention is that the whole idea of something being private, that it's a private collection, finds me thinking about kind of underlying aspects of access to information. Who has access to information, who doesn't, some of those kinds of things. So what I have set up for you is, because I'm very interested in the history of photography, which the exhibition kind of covers, I put together kind of a mini history lecture to start before we jump into the imagery. So for some of you, this is going to be a bit of a review. For others, it'll be some new information. Don't ask me how to spell Nicephore Niepce. That's who this is. Made the first photograph. This is what a printed image looks like from his 8-hour exposure. So during that 8 hours, of course, the sun's moving and things are changing. The way that it's exhibited, it's almost like it's some kind of a national treasure. There's the Harry Ramsden Center at the University of Texas, but you go into this room and it's sealed behind heavy glass, and it's kind of remarkable. But what's really remarkable is on the right, on the left, is the photographic image from his camera. And they were able to pull a print like that from it. And when you see it in person, it looks a lot like what you see right there. And then you look at that casing that it's protected by, and there's a very strange kind of feeling about the whole thing. Like the object somehow came from a UFO, I don't know. So he joined up with Louis Daguerre. This is Daguerre. I think every person that collects photography in the world would do almost anything to have a daguerreotype of Daguerre. It's really something else. But Daguerre was interested, before getting involved with photography, along with Nicephore Niepce, was interested in dioramas. And the way that his dioramas would work is they would lower the light level of the light that's coming in from the windows in the background, so that the light that's in the space would illuminate the front, and then they would open up the windows in the background to allow light to come in from behind it. I think I said that the right way. But the other thing that I'm fascinated about is this idea of trying to record reality. So this is one of Daguerre's photographs of fossils in his studio. Anybody care to take a stab at what the relationship is between fossils and photography? 3, 2, 1, okay. Both of them require something real in terms of classical photography in order to document it. But just like a fossil, it is not the thing itself. It's a copy of the thing. That's how it relates to photography. Well-known photograph from Daguerre's studio of a fellow getting his boot shined. You could see that in the lower left corner. It's probably about a 30-second exposure. And during that time, you do not see all the horse and carriages. You do not see all the people walking on the streets because they're not holding still during that exposure. Some contemporary photographers have made use of that by photographing cities with very long exposures, so it just, everything looks like there's no people. So Daguerre was French. He was #1 in the discovery, announcing the discovery of photography. And then we have William Henry Fox Talbot. His process was different. Daguerre's process, you only make one, and that's it. And what Talbot was able to do was make a paper negative, which he can then contact print and make several copies. The other difference between the two is the amount of detail that one would see in a daguerreotype is almost shocking, if you notice in the exhibition. But when you contact print with the paper, there's something about the texture of the paper and other kinds of things that give it a much softer sort of quality. Almost all photographers at some point put objects on light-sensitive paper to see what happens. I think we can all agree that this is not an exceptional artwork, but it was an experiment. This photograph that he made, I think is really intriguing because it's hard to say, did he recognize the angle of the broom and the angle of the shadow? Did he understand that the door being part open and the broom leaning against the side of the building was going to convey a narrative? Someone just stopped doing something, or someone is about to start doing something. So there's this kind of middle of the road. It's not the beginning and it's not the end. It's describing an activity that's paused for the moment. But between those two people, Talbot in England and Daguerre in France, there was a third person who did not get credit for the invention of photography because one of Daguerre's friends, Francois Arago, almost sounds like an evil name, Arago, talked this photographer into not talking to the French Academy of Science. This photograph was done in 1839. It was the same time period that Daguerre and Talbot were claiming that they invented photography. So his name is Hippolyte Bayard. He was the first photographer to have a public exhibition of photographs. No, could we turn the light down? Thanks. He also experimented with putting things on light-sensitive materials. Thanks. But because he was not credited as one of the discoverers of photography, and his process was different than the other two, Bayard was able to devise a way to make direct positive prints, a direct positive image from a single sheet of paper, light-sensitive paper. What he did was this self-portrait. It's called Photographer as a Drowned Man or something like that. But he faked his own drowning and sent it to the French Academy to show his disdain for the way he was treated. And I found an English translation of what he wrote to them. And it says, "The corpse which you see here is not, or is that of Monsieur Bayard, inventor of the process that has just been shown to you. As far as I know, the indefatigable, hard to pronounce, experimenter has been occupied for about 3 years with his discovery. The government, which has been only too generous to Monsieur Daguerre, has said it can do nothing for Monsieur Bayard, and the poor wretch has drowned himself. Oh, the vagaries of human life. He has been at the morgue for several days, and no one has recognized or claimed him. Ladies and gentlemen, you'd better pass along, for fear of offending your sense of smell. For as you can observe, the face and hands of the gentleman are beginning to decay. So that's what he wrote to the French Academy. This is in the exhibition, cartoon of a daguerreotypist. You can see there's a little bit of a metal brace being attached to the back of the person's head. You can imagine the first time going in to be photographed, if you've never been photographed before. You're smelling all the chemistry. There's all of this equipment around. You're being attached to a metal restraint. And some of the other typical things that we see in daguerreotypes, someone's holding a book or holding a daguerreotype themselves, holding a Bible. So here's a few things from the exhibition. A writer. So in terms of collecting, when people are actually doing something, that is a more sought after kind of image. She's holding a Bible, and she's in mourning. The daguerreotype is very interesting also because it was referred to at the time as a mirror with a memory. So I could just do this, and I think you can tell that there's something shiny about it, but if you look at it with something dark reflecting back, you clearly see the image. So there's always this moment where you're looking at it where you realize you can see your own reflection at the same time. Little hand-colored attempt. She's holding something like a small book, could be a Bible, a fan. Stereo cameras. Most photographers, when they were going out to photograph, would bring a large format camera, but they would also bring this camera. And they'd be using this camera in the studio, on location, as well as outdoors. This photograph by Francis Frith, around 1880 or so, colotype. So part of the beginnings of photography was to be able to show people different parts of the world that they otherwise might not ever see. This one says, copyright George Parker. So that each one of these is an original photograph. I don't think that a lot of people consider stereoscopic imagery on the same level as direct images with a single lens. George E. Curtis is the nephew of Edward Curtis. His middle name is Edward. Now we'll talk about Edward Curtis a little bit when we go in the gallery. Niagara Suspension Bridge. This jumping forward in time a little bit, just because it fits in with this series. This is the photographer Lewis Hine, who is using a stereoscopic camera while he's being photographed with a stereoscopic camera. You gotta love that irony. People's faces, the way they dress, using photography as advertising. What this fellow's holding in his hand is the raincoat that he's wearing and showing how you can crunch it up and pack it in this tiny little ball. These are often referred to as sort of work-related images. I must have a thing for top hats. Now this particular image is a half-plate ambrotype. The ambrotypes were invented by Frederick Scott Archer in 1851. What's different about this is that it's a negative on a glass plate that's intentionally underexposed, so it's a little on the thin side, and then black paper is put behind it, and it changes the negative into a positive. This one, I don't know if you can read, it says Brady down here. This is from Matthew Brady's studio. But it definitely was not Matthew Brady that took this photograph. Partly I will say that because Matthew Brady isn't that good of a photographer. Sorry. And if you look at a lot of his portraits, they're very stiff and not very sensitive to the subject in many cases. So this one being a half plate and being done sometime between 1856 and 1861, according to some folks. Alexander Gardner was hired by Brady in 1856. Alexander Gardner is from Scotland. Multi-skilled individual, brought a lot of skill sets to Brady's studio, including the idea of being able to enlarge glass plate negative. So I think this is Alexander Gardner's photograph. And I also partly say that because we know that in 1850, Matthew Brady's eyesight started to fail. And by 1856, he was not really doing much photography at all. He was functioning more as a director and hiring photographers to work for him. Also ambrotype. A little bit of green hand coloring, tiny bit of pink on the cheeks, another top hat. This is fun because I think that it was supposed to be cropped for use, because you see the white sheet behind her. I don't think that it was intended to show the rest of the image. Pretty complex background. There's a quarter plate. Oh, one thing I had to mention, because it's mentioned in the show, is that after I bought this, it was kind of expensive, but after I bought it, about a month later, I got contacted by the fellow who was selling it, asking to buy it back. I love this as an object. That oval of the hat and the oval of the way the object is starting to deteriorate. Obviously not intended, but interesting to see. Piccolo, I think. I don't think it's a flute. But remember, I mentioned people doing things. Can't say for sure if this is potentially an advertisement for a bicycle company, like the fellow with the raincoat. And then just people's faces, the characters. How many people think this guy actually plays a violin? Do you see the way he's holding the bow? I don't play the violin, and I know you don't hold a bow like that. It's kind of funny. And then I love this. I don't know whose idea, I didn't talk with anybody at the museum about it, but I love the idea of pairing up two pictures of twins. We have twins within twins. Roger Fenton, 1855. Was really one of the first war photographers, the Crimean War in 1855. Excellent photographer. But what happened here? Because we see this road, and then we see that road, and the difference between them is one doesn't have cannonballs, one does. Which came first? The cannonballs or the road? I'm supposed to say the chicken or the egg. But what happened was they set up to do the shot and decided, you know what, let's throw some of these cannonballs on the road, make it a little more dramatic. Well, while often scholars talk about this and Matthew Brady as being sort of the originators of photojournalism, you can see that there weren't any rules yet. What they're trying to do is illustrate an idea, a feeling, an experience of the place. But Americans would not be outdone. Roger Fenton was English. How many of you have seen this photograph before? A couple? This is called the sharpshooter. And his body was actually dragged from about 50 yards away. Because Alexander Gardner found this spot and said, this would be a great place to set up the shot. So they dragged the body over and set up the gun and made the exposure. Again, there are no rules yet. So this is just a way to describe perhaps what it felt like to be at anywhere near a battle. I think this one and the following one are also Alexander Gardner, because at the time this was made, towards the end of the Civil War, Brady certainly could not focus the camera. And the other reason I think that this was Alexander Gardner is because he had the experience and the creativity to think to put a horse in the background. A lot of people doing photographs at the time wouldn't have thought to do that. Brady had about 35 photographers that were working for him. He supplied them with horses, a carriage that they used as a darkroom. He gave them camera equipment. So he decided he owned their photography, and in fact, there is a fair use law that makes what he did actually legal, except that he didn't give credit to the people that made the photographs for him. This one was kind of startling when I found it. It's a carte de visite, which is a small card with a photograph on it. There's several in the show. He was in the Civil War, and he was trying with some other people to make their way to Fort Collins in heavy snow. The other people that were with him died. He lost most of his legs and most of his arms and part of his nose. But he was selling copies of this photograph for 25 cents to help support his wife and children. Another use of photography. This is odd because I look on the back of this and the photographer's name is Benson in Pontiac, Michigan, and I lived about 10 miles from there. No relation. This is one of Matthew Brady's photographers, because there just weren't a lot of photographers outside of Matthew Brady's efforts to document this, but there wasn't anything on here about who this photographer is. So I wanted to show you something very quickly in terms of one of the things that you do when you collect is you want to find out stuff about what you're collecting. So my first stop is usually Wikipedia, and then I go from there. But as I'm looking, I'm going through, and I'm finding, oh, here's some of the photographers. There's Alexander Gardner. James Gardner is Alexander's brother. Timothy O'Sullivan. These are all portraits of the people. George Bernard, excellent photographer. George Roche. Found him pretty fast. So that's usually why the first place I look is Wikipedia, because oftentimes it'll save you a minute. All right. The other thing about this, I'll bet anybody that that hat was not there when they were setting up. And in fact, a lot of the photographers that were doing the photographs during the Civil War brought props with them. This is not really documentary photography, it's more illustrative. At the Battle of Antietam, which was the first big one that these folks went to, they didn't touch anybody. But by the time they got to Gettysburg, where you saw the home of the sharpshooter, they had already gotten used to being around a bunch of dead people and went about doing their business. There's another image exactly like this, except there were two guys. And I'm pretty sure that they were together. This is a tourist photograph after the Civil War. When Kodak came out with their camera, you push the button and we do the rest, was their saying. The first photographs, 1888, that were done with Kodak cameras were round. The image that's projected from a lens is actually round. So here's a collector's fantasy. I want to find the photograph that this kid made of this woman. Never happened. But that's the kind of thing that I would try to look for. Anybody familiar with hidden mother pictures? They are weird. They are so weird. And I just found one the other day. Up until this moment, I've always bought them because they're so hard to find. So I'm just going to leave this up here along with the daguerreotype and along with this, which I will digress for a moment. It says, Florida, the land of flowers and tropical scenery. And these are all, you'll see it, stacks of cannonballs at a fort in St. Augustine. So they thought a way to have kids photographed, a way to keep them still, is to have the mother sitting behind them holding them. And whether or not they were so naive to think that people aren't going to know that that's a person under that piece of cloth is kind of funny. But I think like the one, the tintype, where the woman is standing in front of the white background, I think these were intended to be cropped tighter too. So you just see the pattern of the fabric and the baby, but you rarely see them like that. You'd see the mother's hands on the sides of the little kid's head. This is a really creepy one. The mother's leaning to the side, and it looks like the father's hand is coming in from the other side. And this one also I found intriguing. From what I can tell from the image and looking at it very closely, that the hands are an African American person. So it might be the nanny of the baby that is holding the baby's head still. I just noticed the kid looks kind of pissed. This is a contemporary tintype. So a lot of those processes, collodion, are really fully back in fashion. You might have seen some of Sally Mann's photographs. Also, some of them are of battlefields. This is Kelly Anderson Staley. I got this particular print in a raffle. It was the only one that I really wanted out of all of them. So I bought $300 worth of tickets, and I just, every time somebody put a ticket in, I put in a ticket. And I got it. Thrilled. These are one of a kind also. There was a lot of interest in death. And people photographed, like this is this woman's child. An indoor stereoscopic image, which shows an empty cradle is the name of, or the empty crib is the title of it. So I'm going through drawers and drawers and drawers of, okay, photographs, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I found this one. You'll see it in the show. It's only about this big. It's a child listening to a watch tick. Why would you do a photograph of a child listening to a watch tick? Because the parents knew the child was going to die. You see the photograph in there? And if you can't read it, it says "Our darling" in the bottom. This is her funeral. His. I don't know. A French. None? So the little girl that's standing is my grandmother. The older woman is my great-grandmother. In Russia, you can see they're standing on dirt. I wish I could tell you who the other two kids are, but I don't know. I think we'll talk about this in the gallery. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about this first little installment of the presentation today? Okay.
I have a quick question. How do you find these photographs? Not to take away the place of good.
I'm sorry. My hearing, my hearing is a little shot because of David Bowie.
He asked, where do you find the photographs?
I found them a lot of different places. I found this one online. I found this one in the antique store that's next to, what is the tire place? Antique shop. Found that online. So there's a lot of eBay action going on, but you do have to be careful, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Also, one of the things that's kind of an advantage of being a photographer is that you can trade with other photographers. And in certain instances, I used my skills to barter. So there's a couple images in the show that I was paid with photographs. And they are great photographs. One is by Edward Curtis, the other one is by Edward Muybridge. And both of them are good stories. So let's make our way over to the gallery, and we'll talk about some of the larger works and more contemporary works that are in that show.